there's a whole range of obviously sub work that happens once you do the basics of, okay, my category is $2.5 billion online and is going to grow to be $4 billion in the next 3 years. Great. What in the world does that mean? Where do I go and how do I actually go capture and make decisions against those numbers?
Welcome back to the Commerce Collective podcast brought to you by Flywheel. My name is Emma Irwin and I am your host for this series. Today, we are taking a look at Flywheel's consulting business, its philosophy and methodology, and then we're going to walk through a real-life example of how the team helps brands plan for the future, understand opportunities, set goals, and solve real-life challenges. Without further ado, let's meet our guest for this episode.
So I am Michael Rogosa, and I'm the Senior Director of our consulting team here at Flywheel.
Perfect. And we will get into what consulting team is and does in a second, but I need to know what the last thing you purchased online is.
My nephew and my niece are huge baseball people, and whenever they visit my parents, their grandparents here in Boston, they always want to play wiffle ball. And my parents were running very, very low on wiffle ball supplies. So that was my present to not only my dad, but also to my niece and nephew, was a nice 25 pack of wiffle balls that I got on Amazon and got delivered so that they can stop using the 2 broken wiffle balls that we've been using for the last 5 years.
Incredible. I was going to say, I recently saw a TikTok about the quintessential suburban childhood experience of getting hit with broken wiffle balls or scratched up wiffle balls and how much that actually hurt.
Oh, and it's the range of wiffle balls that are out there, like the hard wiffle balls that don't actually have holes in them, that I can still remember very clearly hitting my brother in the eye with one of those wiffle balls and sending him straight inside with a bleeding face. And so I was very happy that my niece and nephew are not going to have to face that same fate, and they can enjoy a nice professional wiffle ball as it's supposed to be.
Love it. Love the product innovation we see in the simple joys of life of a wiffle ball. Okay. Last question I'm going to ask you, though you're going to answer it at the end, is just something that lives on a digital wish list of yours, which means that it just sits in a cart forever, but you won't actually purchase it. And we will wrap up the episode with your answer and why, if that sounds good.
Sounds good to me.
Okay. Let's get into first discussing what our consulting team at Flywheel actually does. It may even be a team that you're not familiar with, as we tend to focus on our client services function a lot on this show. Let's have Mike tell us more about Flywheel Consulting.
The Flywheel Consulting team's main difference is that we work across all areas of retail. So we are not a e-commerce specific division of the company. We're not a store-based division. We work across a total retail landscape, and we really support ad hoc projects for our clients. And the other main difference is that where the majority of our company is executional, hands-on support, where we're actually doing the work for our clients as basically a extension of their own teams. My team, at the end of the day, we're a strategy consulting firm. So we sort of end our space with recommendations on many times, and most of the time, future growth strategies and helping people plan for where growth opportunities are going to come from, but without any, we're not a McKinsey, Bain management consulting firm that's then in your office Monday through Thursday. We are ultimately providing recommendations and a vision of where future growth is coming from.
Now, I'll be honest and admit that our consulting team works on questions and problems that brands face that are a bit bigger than what I was used to back in my days of being a retail specialist that focused on Amazon. Does anyone remember that part about me? Anyways, I asked Mike to tell me about how the team approaches helping brands with planning for the future and why planning for the future is so tough, because before brands can adequately solve any challenges and set goals, they kind of need to have an idea of what's ahead.
Planning for the future is always inherently tough because you're working on unknown information. You're trying your best to create multiple scenarios off of information that you have right now that could very much change at any point in the future. So that's the first thing that brands struggle with, is actually creating multiple versions of the truth. Most brands actually just go with one forecast and sort of hope that that turns out right, instead of making sort of a base case, a low, and an aggressive sort of forecast that they're talking about. And more broadly, what we're here to talk about, e-com forecasting especially, most of our brands that we work with in this space have been around for a long time, grew up in stores, and e-commerce has been this emerging sort of interloper into their business that now in the last 10 years has become, if not the main growth driver, it's one of the top two growth drivers for their business, but it's forecasted and planned for still in a very different way than the rest, and in most cases, the majority of our clients' business. Still 70+% of almost all of our clients' business go through physical outlets. But as e-commerce and just commerce in general continues to merge, there's a misunderstanding of, as I'm planning for e-com, do I need to look at that just as it stands for revenue, like what's being sold online? Or am I really taking an understanding that the investments that I make online have an impact on the entire retail world, not just sales moving through Amazon? And so there's a lot of these different moving parts and pieces, especially when you then layer that out to the entire globe, that make this a very complicated thing for most brands to do. And most brands do not do it well. There's a reason why this is the number one question that we get asked on our team is just help me find a global single source of truth for what size of prize and what opportunity looks like within my category, because there are just a lot of different factors that make a consistent single view very, very hard to get.
Is there such thing as a global single source of truth?
Well, we think that we provide the closest thing to it that's out there in the landscape. So the way that most people do it right now, and you can't fault them, it's really a lack of information in the landscape. But most companies, they'll try and set maybe a broad global goal, but it'll be based on either just what they did last year or historical performance without sort of taking into account how dynamics are changing across the landscape. And then each individual market is doing their own thing based on their own data sources, the traditional data sources that most players used, whether that be Nielsen, IRI, eMarketer. Like there's 50 different sources that teams would be using, and each local team is likely using one piece of that. And these sources don't even have the same methodology, and in many cases don't even include the same channels when they are defining this is the view of retail. So what we at least tell our clients, and why we think we're uniquely positioned in this space, is through Flywheel's Retail Insights platform, we are at least tracking retail in every country around the world with a consistent methodology. So as a starting point, we're tracking every single retailer, chain retailer, store-based and online, that exists in the world. And so that gives us at least a really strong starting point to be able to say, what's e-commerce in every market around the world with a consistent methodology? Then we layer on top of that every channel of retail. It's not just food, drug, mass. It includes discount, it includes club, it includes last mile operators like the Instacarts and the Glovos, et cetera, of the world. And increasingly, it includes social and eB2B. And so you have all of these things where we are really trying to get all the different elements of e-commerce and of commerce in general that can be included and put it on sort of one data source. And then that's a really powerful global tool that we can then marry with our really specific Amazon and Walmart knowledge, where we do get down to the item level sales, that we are very confident in our ability to forecast that across a number of markets around the world. And so with those two data sources basically combined, we think that we get companies closer to anything that they could get trying to do on their own, or providing, leaving individual markets up to their own devices.
And I'm curious, you mentioned the word kind of like measuring the opportunity, but I'm wondering, when we're talking about the word opportunity, this is one of the last episodes we did. I did this whole thing on wordplay of what we really mean by words that have very vague definitions. But when you're talking with brands and you're talking about measuring up the opportunity, is that the potential e-commerce sales that might exist for a brand? Is it the entire size of the market?
It's both. Yeah. So the starting point is purely the size of the market, meaning their specific category itself. So we feel, very confident in our ability to get down to the exact definition that brands want to use to describe their category. And then we would be able to show them size of that category across any country in the world, broken out by retailer, by business model, and then being able to forecast that up to 5 years in the future. That's, again, one of the core strengths of our retail insights database is that we have data that we've been tracking for the past 10 or 15 years. And always there's a 5-year future forecast component to it because, that's the pure part of our company. We're here to help brands grow. And just because one customer or one country was your biggest in the past does not mean it should be your main focus in the future. So we always try to reformat opportunity by not looking just at scale, but looking mainly at growth on a dollars basis. Percentage, you'll always have those smaller markets that are growing fast, but we try to do it based on who's going to add the most dollars over the next 1, 2, 3, 5-year planning cycle, whatever brands are really operating on.
I love listening to you talk through this because it just, every time I do these episodes, especially with like internal guests, it reminds me of how we just have some kind of solution for like every area of absolutely anything you could ever need. And then it like perfectly you can like relay it down the field, like you said, into client services who then take, hey, this is your business on one specific market, and we'll take that item level strategy all the way up to where to invest next. It's really cool.
Yeah, and it's something that I think is really unique that our company has, and it speaks to more so than the tools and technology and data that we have. It's really the people that we have, both across our consulting team and the wider team, that grew up in this landscape where there are not perfect answers. That is sort of the landscape within e-commerce and within broader business in general, but especially this space that moves so quickly. You have to get comfortable making decisions without a perfect answer at the end. All of this is going to be based on estimates and modeling, and especially when we're talking about goal setting, the estimates that we make, this is why we talk about scenario planning. There's not, as much as we would love to say, one right answer. We don't get it down to the penny correct all the time. So what we're really trying to provide is a direction that allows us to then make capability, resource, process investments that say, this is the broad scale opportunity. How do I really then go about capturing it? And that's where we sort of hand it over to the client services team to take these broad scale opportunities and say, okay, how do I actually go out and win that? And they do that better than anybody in the space.
Hey, love to hear it. So we've gone over covering, measuring, or attempting to measure opportunity. And then, as you mentioned, going into that kind of goal setting. But I would love if you can help my brain comprehend how we move from just understanding the opportunity to the goal setting. Because I'm imagining that, like, I obviously don't lead an e-commerce brand, but if I did, I could imagine, like, I work with Flywheel Consulting. They're like, this is the opportunity. And then my CMO comes back and says, all right, what are you going to do about it? And so can you help me understand that process and how you guys look at that?
Yeah, and this is where you get the battles between the global and local teams most specifically, yes. Because you have targets that very often are not ambitious enough, which is surprising to some local teams, but that's probably the biggest tension point that we see between brands very often is their local teams will be setting too achievable targets based on what we actually think the opportunity is. And the biggest sort of mistake that we see out in the industry when you're talking about goals is they are setting their goals, many brands, with a metric around digital penetration, meaning if I'm L'Oreal or I'm P&G or whoever it is, what % of my sales are now done online? And that is a nice metric, but it is completely irrespective of what's happening in the category. Just because their digital penetration moves from 8 to 10%, should it have been 8 to 15% based on the category growth? And so this is where when you have and you start with the overall opportunity within the country, region, globe, whatever you're focused on, bringing it down into an actual goal is then when we look at the market share that brand actually represents and has within the space compared to, its competitors and what we think it should be growing at. Because the other thing that a lot of companies struggle with, and this is especially e-commerce teams trying to convince their commercial leaders, is fair share online looks very different than fair share in store. You're in a much broader competitive environment where little tiny ASINs that, number in the millions continue to siphon off, share here, share there, and different things. And it's an ever evolving cycle. And so when you get down from that broad opportunity, your category is going to sell $300 million over the course of the next 12 months. getting it down to goals for your company really then starts with, okay, of that 300 million, what do I have today? So do I have an understanding of actually my market share and what's moving through these different platforms right now? Where am I compared to the competitive set? Is my share, am I the leading brand? Am I the fifth brand? And from there, you can start to really start to plan out your goals of, all right, what would I have to invest? What would actually need to be true for me to pick up 3, 4, 5 share percentage points and become, the leader in this category? Or am I comfortable continuing to be a fast follower and sort of just tagging along and mirroring the category growth? Those are the ways that when we work with companies, it really goes from, okay, the number is one thing. How do you then bring it back down to an achievable targets for your teams, split by geography, split by customer, split by business model, to really find out where those pockets of growth are coming from? And then what do I need to do as a brand against my competitors to really capture it?
Now that we've covered these struggles of planning for the future, understanding the opportunity, and have touched on setting goals, I asked Mike if there are any other common goals the team sees and works on beyond sales and share.
The understanding and the shifting of KPIs is one of the most interesting things that's happening over the past few years, especially as e-commerce, I don't want to say as e-commerce, grows in importance, because it's been important for a while, but the pandemic really accelerated, most companies' share of sales moving through online, but we still aren't seeing on a broad strokes an evolution of the way to measure online. And so goals, I'll go back to one of the first things that I talked about. What complicates a lot of companies' goal planning or opportunity setting is thinking I'm only looking at e-commerce sales as sales that happen online, without recognizing what is the actual influence that my investment online is having in store-based sales or in just my marketing and awareness. And so when we talk about goal setting with companies in this space, it is shifting KPIs where certainly sales and share matter. Profitability is always on the forefront, especially in the last year and a half, as inflation and price increases have become such a topic on everybody's mind. But then you get down into these huge variation of, some companies are measuring their digital health score. Some companies are trying to get an arm on what is the actual digital influence beyond sales. You really get down into a lot of different metrics that people are trying to understand. So it really does sort of run the gambit depending on the company that you're talking to.
I'm thinking through, even working on different client accounts, at the end of the day, all of their KPIs, a lot of them have completely different ones, even if it's their competitors. So it's just interesting to think through.
Yeah, there's certainly not a standard that exists out there in the space, especially within this e-commerce space, around what specifically we should be measuring beyond sales and profitability that are basically universal. It's then a huge variety, all the way down to even things like the Advantage scorecard that's saying, okay, how am I rating amongst my retailers? Some brands are still very, very much adamant about using that sort of relationship score with their retailers, and some brands have long ago left that behind. So it really is a mix of where your company is in the life cycle. But the overarching thing that we talk about in any goal setting, and sort of why we're here talking about this, is the first step in that change management is still understanding what that opportunity looks like, because otherwise you are making all of these decisions without a North Star. You don't know what you're actually trying to grab. And that's what we see lots of companies doing right now.
Going way back to the beginning, you mentioned a lot of branches aren't great at being able to determine and measure that opportunity. Do you see that being something that's going to change in the next couple of years? Will brands ever be able to do it well without the help of a Flywheel Consulting business who's keeping track of it?
So without the help of a third party, I don't think so. There's always going to be things, and this is one of the core things that we recommend or that we advise brands on all the time, is what do you bring in-house? What do you own versus what do you rent versus what do you buy? And opportunity sizing, just because of the lack of consistency in data sources that exist out there, the lack of regional coverage or global market coverage, I don't think that a brand can undertake this on their own, because they'll have a vision of their own product, certainly, but filling in the gaps in the competitive landscape across all the different business models, they'll end up using, as they do right now, lots and lots of different sources that make it a very messy landscape, that make you working across very imperfect information when you're trying to, especially at a global level, decide, where do I deploy my resources? Okay, is it going to be APAC or LATAM or North America? If all of your opportunity numbers are built off the back of very, very different sources, some include last mile, some don't, some include social, some don't, you're going to really struggle to get your resources aligned to the right places that are actually driving growth. So we see this landscape as a pretty complicated place, and we're living and breathing it every day. So for our brand clients that for the most part all year are focused on delivering the number and getting their items into the hands of consumers, the few times a year and the weeks during the year where they really focus on this longer term strategy planning, it's a very tough thing for them to gather all that information in the time frame that they have to then make their plans for the next 1-3 year cycle.
Okay, I think that wraps up most of my e-commerce related questions. I suppose the digital wish list is an e-commerce related question, but I am curious, that thing that lives on your digital wish list that you just won't purchase, and why?
Yeah, so the thing that's certainly the biggest thing that's on my digital wish list is a new home, but that's a little bit too broad to fit in my Amazon basket at the moment. But the thing that's sort of been sitting there as this fun idea that I really want to exist, but haven't really found the right thing yet. I am the very happy father of a 1.5-year-old daughter. And I found that chasing her around on my knees on hardwood floors is very hard on the knees. And so what I have been searching for and have not really found a great option for is some sort of sweatpants with knee pads built into them that you just throw on, and I can slide around the floor chasing after her and playing, without getting wood burns and burned up all day long. So that is my number one digital wish list item that does not exist yet.
I like how you think. Hopefully someone listens to this episode.
Yeah, I'm excited for the product recommendations that are going to come through.
Or like maybe someone knows how to sew or something. You can build a prototype. Exactly. And now we're Flywheel that sells padded sweatpants.
Exactly. I think there's an untapped opportunity size there that we can get on.
And with that, we are at the end of this episode of the Commerce Collective podcast. And now you have an incredible amount of insight into not only what kinds of work Flywheel's consulting team does, but also how they do it. If you're interested in exploring working with the consulting team, please do reach out to me at emma.irwin@flywheeldigital.com if you forgot, and I will get you where you need to go. I've been your host, Emma Irwin, and I will see you next time.